Okay, we should be live. Hello, everybody who's here already. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by MeasureLab. Today's subject is conversational analytics. It's just gone 1 o'clock, so I'm just going to wait maybe a few seconds just while people are still joining and settling. But while they're doing so, I'll just tell you, if you haven't joined one of our webinars before, there's a chat feature on the right-hand sidebar, which you can use just to chat throughout the webinar, really. If you have any questions for the Q&A at the end, you can add them in the chat, but it would be easier for me to keep track of them if you add them in the Q&A section, which is another feature in the sidebar. And that'll just keep all the questions together. And we should hopefully have 5 minutes or so for Q&A at the end. But we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to hand over to today's speakers. So we've got Lowry Lewis, who's a data and insights analyst here at MeasureLab, and we have Matthew Hewson, who's our director of engineering and technology. So over to you, Lowry, to kick us off.
Cool, thank you. So this is our webinar on conversational analytics, and just before we start, I kind of wanted to give a little preface to this. I'm personally super excited about this technology. Before MeasureLab, I used to work in a company called Mumsnet, which is a really data-driven company. Business decisions were always based on the data available by every single team. But that meant that we were always kind of fighting ad hoc questions, which really affected our own bigger project data work. I think these kind of tools are exactly what data teams are really screaming for. Being able to give people access to the data on their own, avoiding the bottleneck that is really asking data teams for ad hoc queries, saving data teams time from those ad hoc queries, and also potentially giving the opportunity for more bigger projects to come along because more people will have access to the data. So just as an insight of what we're going to cover today, we're going to start with natural language to SQL and the importance of metadata around this. We're then going to move on to Looker Studio, the conversational analytics that's available in the Pro membership there. The Conversational Analytics API, Matthew's going to take us through this, and then also getting this tool back into the hands of people asking the questions because it exists in quite a techie environment. And then finally, we're going to finish off with your questions. It's important to note here today as well, we're not going to be covering the Google Analytics Advisor or Looker Conversational Analytics. We're focusing on the tools that most of our clients have readily available to them. So natural language to SQL. This is available across all BigQuery projects, and basically it's what every tool that we're going to talk about today is based off of. And it does what it says on the tin, really. You write a question in natural, human, normal language, and it returns you the SQL that queries your specific data set, and it gets you those results. So it's available in the BigQuery interface, and all you need to do is turn on the BigQuery to Gemini API, and you click on this little text here that says Generate SQL with Gemini. When you click on this, you get a little pop-up window that says, asks you for your prompt. And here I asked how many users spend more than 20 minutes on site yesterday. It produces you within seconds a fully working query based on that question. And it will tell you how much it will cost to run as well. You can then refine this query, and you could say, for example, use this field instead, use a different table. I asked it to use a different table. What this then does is it retains the knowledge of that first question, appends this second prompt onto it, and produces you a whole new query based on this new prompt. So you can see here it's used a completely different table, and based on that new table has completely created a new query on that. So what you can then do is insert this into your console, and you run it as normal. It pulls in the 2 questions it took you to get there. It'll say how many megs of data it will take to query, and you can run it as normal. The only black box cost in this is the Gemini tokens it takes to produce that query. Now, in all of these examples I'm going to give today, we've used the Google Analytics for data for the Google Store e-commerce table. And this is a raw GA4 events table. And in my experience, it's one of the hardest ones to query. So what I found is that good SQL generation depends heavily on good metadata. So this is my favorite question to ask all of these tools, and you're going to see it a lot today. But anyone who's worked with GA4 data in BigQuery will understand the pain. But how many sessions came from Google? Natural language to SQL produced this query, which upon first inspection looks like it's perfect. It counts distinct of user pseudo ID, session ID. But if you look a little bit closer, and anyone who's used to this will understand, it's used user first traffic source instead of session source. Another thing it's done is it's filtered on Google with a capital G, whereas Google in this field actually has a little g. So that's something that's really important to note. One way to get over this is to add table descriptions and column descriptions as well. So here, for an example, I asked how many bots were on site, and it did this really, really weird query initially without the description or anything, just on the raw data. It counted the distinct user pseudo IDs where user pseudo ID was null. So this query actually means absolutely nothing. But with the addition of this description, where I'd said the bot detector flag 1 or 0 can be found in event parameters, it then correctly pulls bot detector from event parameters and counts the distinct user pseudo ID. So that then, with a little bit of help, then gives us the right answer. One thing that's really important to note here as well is that in this description, I tried to suggest that session-based traffic is found using this way. First user attribution traffic is found on traffic source.source. Whatever I did to try and help it along in this instance of the session attributed traffic versus first user, it did not work for some reason. I can't tell you why. The good thing as well about metadata is that Gemini can even automatically create all of these column descriptions and table descriptions for you. It just has that cost involved as well. So because the natural language to SQL was still struggling with this question, despite how much metadata I provided it, what I decided to do was instead unnest the data and provide a good column name. So I'd unnested it under this unnested table and labeled the column as session source. And with the exact same question, it was now correctly looking in that session source column instead of first user traffic source. So in my opinion, this tool really works best for analysts, engineers, anyone who's got a good enough SQL knowledge to be able to really critique the SQL that it's producing. And I think it's going to be amazing in speeding up those ad hoc questions and in generating quite complicated SQL quickly. So in terms of the good things about it, it's very quick. It has a pretty good knowledge of GA4 data for nesting purposes. So for example, it knows that page location exists under event parameters. It's a mystery to me why it doesn't do this attribution correctly. And you can use it to for all the BigQuery functionality, so create, delete, drop tables, provided that your user permissions exist to do that. And then in terms of the not so good, bad column names and descriptions throw it off. It doesn't have knowledge inside the data like we saw with Google with that capital G. It tries to guess based on the input you give it, but obviously that will return 0 results. So it still relies a bit on user knowledge. And then also it relies on natural language, so the results can vary quite dramatically. We have seen instances where it just uses, for the same prompt, a completely different table. So it's just something to bear in mind. Moving on to Looker Studio Conversational Analytics. This was meant to be a completely live demo, but, and I'm so sad to say this is the most buggy tool that we've used so far. It's it's kept losing agents, deleting history, but it's really sad to say because it feels like it's going to be one of the best one day. So if you go onto your Looker Studio Pro homepage, you will see this button. And if you click this, you can go into the Conversational Analytics UI. So you need to create an agent before you can chat to it. And what you need to do in your agent setup is give it a name, give it a user-facing description, which it doesn't affect the agent performance. It literally is just to help anyone else using the agent because you can share them. You can connect it to a single data source. And that's really important to note. You can't have multiple data sources. It won't blend. It's just one table. And then you need to provide the system instructions. Now I've pasted in here all of the system instructions I gave my agent when I built this. And in here, what you really want to do is provide information around the data set, the business context, rules around how the data should be queried, all that kind of thing. So here I added information around the dates that existed in this data. So I said it's only available for January. If the user asks for data outside of this, then tell them, sorry, but no. Then I gave it a little hint saying, when you're analyzing sessions, use a concatenation of user pseudo ID, GA session ID, just in case that isn't obvious to the AI. And then I tried again to describe the difference between session-based traffic and user attribution, basically by writing close to the exact SQL it would need. So for a few examples of this, I asked the question, which users spent more than average time on product pages but didn't buy anything in that session? Now that's quite a complicated multi-stage query that would take me quite a while to write. And what you can see here is it's produced multiple queries, intermediary steps, and then finally produced the end query, which is really impressive. It's huge. It's multiple CTEs, joins, window functions, and quite complicated logic, to be honest. And the fact that that came from one question is really impressive. And the reason that that worked so well is because of all of that extra system instructions, that semantic layer that I'd given it. In my second example, I gave it a really vague request saying, can you make a purchase funnel? But again, based on the instructions I'd given it in its system instructions, it knew the event names to use in that purchase funnel. But it went away, it did that, and it produced a really nice little chart at the end as well, just to visualize it. Then finally, I asked my favorite question, how many sessions from Google? And it did it right. It took the session source from inside the event parameters, and it came out with 36,500, which was amazing. And you could see here, there it is, it's using the event parameter source. Now this is problematic though, because this was on day one where I created the agent, and I couldn't fault it on this day. And I was like, this is the best, this is fantastic. By day two, using the same agent, having changed absolutely nothing, I asked it the same questions, how many sessions came from Google, and it defaulted to the user attribution field again. I said no session-based. It again kind of gaslit me and did the session-based again. Then I said, no, that's user first, read your instructions. It argues with me saying, no, I am doing session level. Then I explain to it clearly, I say, where is session-based? And it failed to fetch answers. Not ideal. And then by day three, again, nothing had been changed. But then I asked the same question and it couldn't complete my request because my permissions had been taken away from the data. Nothing had changed. I still had access to the data. It was just very buggy. When I say who this works best for now, this is providing that this is a tool that is trustworthy and consistent. But I think this is going to be fantastic for teams for ad hoc, non-critical questions. I need to really put emphasis there. Definitely not for the C-suite stakeholders, because it will allow people to really explore their own data in a controlled environment that you set up for them, perhaps by providing custom BigQuery tables that contain everything they would need. So in terms of what it does well, it's stakeholder friendly, easy initial setup. It doesn't have knowledge of inside the data again still, but if no data is returned, it can give a bit more context and suggest that maybe the filtering was wrong. you can add metadata to avoid the SQL fails. There's nice visualizations. In terms of where it falls short, it requires Looker Studio Pro. And to me, the fact that this exists in Looker Studio at all is pretty random. To me, it doesn't have any link to Looker Studio dashboarding. It doesn't even give you the option to have all of those extra Looker Studio charts. It only does scatter bar and line charts. Pretty big flop for me as well is that it only connects to a single data source. You cannot blend, inconsistent results, and also all of the queries that the Looker Studio conversational agent runs it runs using the agent creator's account. So anyone that's using it will run queries using your account. You cannot use a service account yet, so tracking this is going to be really difficult. But if you could potentially get around that by setting up a specific workspace account, maybe a data team workspace. I'll pass over to Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So I'm going to go and talk a little bit more about the Conversational Analytics API and the ADK. Don't worry, there are little boxes with definitions on the bottom here because I'm going to have to move at a bit of a pace, and we're kind of putting our head torches on and going into the sort of the minds a little bit with some of this stuff. So, if you go to the next slide, please, Larry. So, the Conversational Analytics API is essentially a reasoning engine sitting in between user input and output, and you can layer in all of the tables, data sets, and the various pieces of metadata and things that we'll come on to shortly to give that reasoning engine, that bit in the middle, a lot of knowledge about what data it's looking at and allow people to query that more readily. The big difference here is that you can take these interfaces, this natural language application you create almost, and put it into custom applications, or more usefully, you can put it in places where people are already working. So, for example, if your company uses Slack, you could embed it in Slack. If it's using Looker Studio Dashboard, you could put it in a Looker Studio Dashboard. You can also access the Conversational Analytics API via ADK, Agent Development Kit, and via the MCP database toolbox, which is available as a tool set for that ADK. Next slide, please. So the Agent Development Kit, this is essentially a framework that Google has put together that allows you to create these multi-agent workflows. So you could have one agent, and each of these agents have their own sort of distinct set of tasks and rules that they follow. So you could have one agent that goes off and grabs the schema from a BigQuery table and looks at it, and then passes it to the next agent, who then does more of a piece of analysis on it, and then pass it to the next agent that does some form of visualization on it. So sort of leveling up all the things Larry's already talked about by separating out the concerns and allowing it to pass things back and forth. It could even then go off and run Python scripts and do some deeper analysis. All of this can be deployed to Google's Vertex agent engine. So this is a pretty much a completely fully managed service within Google that handles things like sessions and conversation memory and API access and all of those kinds of things. And like I said before, you can take it where people work. You're essentially creating a little mini hosted application. So the two examples that we played with is we surfaced it in Slack. So I could ask Brian, our friendly internal AI, particular questions about a particular data set, and it would answer those questions, pass visualizations, everything back into Slack for me. Similarly, you could centralize around Gemini Enterprise and use it in Gemini Enterprise, and it can pull from that agent engine place as well. The other cool thing about this is you could have different agents for different stakeholder groups. So you could have one agent that has a set of accesses to a specific sets of data and metadata and all those things, and another one over here that's for, say, the marketing group, the product group, the C-suites, wherever you want to do that. Next slide. You could also talk to the Conversational Analytics API directly. So the Google has released a specific API for conversational analytics. And with that, they've created a lot of resources that you can kind of use to tinker and play with this stuff. So one really good one, they've released a Colab notebook that takes you through all the different calls and steps that are contained within the Conversational Analytics API. So you can tinker and experiment with different messaging and system messaging. One, I guess, important distinction here is for both of these things I've talked about, you can put in as loads of different tables and data sets and get them to join and things like that. You're not limited to the one data set or one table like you were with some of the previous examples. And then what you can do is create simple interfaces with the Conversational Analytics API, like a little Streamlit app, and then you can embed that Streamlit app directly in Looker Studio Pro. So that takes it a little bit more to Lowry's vision of joining those two things together, where you've got Looker Studio Pro and a dashboard sitting on top of data, but then you've actually got a conversational interface within the same place, and it kind of makes a bit more sense than it being off to the side like Looker Studio Pro is. Next slide. With all of this stuff, we've kind of already hammered the importance of detail, but what these systems do, ADK and Conversational Analytics API, is to give you a lot more opportunity to layer in detail. So specifically, the documentation calls out system instructions where you can really give it a specific identity of like you're serving this set of people or this stakeholder group. You can list out the tables, the fields, the names of those, the schema and the descriptions, and you can specify relationships between tables, what columns they should join on, left join, right join. You can put all of that information in there. Most critically, probably glossaries and sort of semantics, so it can understand typical phrases and terms and metrics that are unique to you and your company, and synonyms of those things. So when you're asking, it makes it much more usable for people just to ask a question they would normally actually ask in natural language. We say natural language a lot, but you've got to be very pointed with how you're speaking. This brings it a bit more just to how they would ask a question, and all sorts of other additional descriptions you can add in there as well. Next slide. You could also have this human in the loop type optimization. So this is an idea of monitoring the live systems that are out there and looking at the types of questions that people are asking, the types of responses that the LLM is providing, and then tweaking the system instructions to sort of service those types of questions that are happening. With, say, that additional detail I just mentioned that you can add in, you can actually add in SQL question pairs to the prompting of these platforms, so that it can take a good guess of like, well, this question is quite similar to this question. I kind of want to write SQL similar to this, or this. I've got this exact question. I've already got the SQL here. I'll use that. And you can feed this back in. Google literally released about 2 or 3 days ago, I think, BigQuery Agent Analytics, which is essentially it outputs, as people talk to these systems, it outputs the data into a BigQuery table, and then you can look at all of the different questions, answers, figure that out, loop it back in, and improve your application. Another bonus of that is it also tells you how many tokens have been used, so you can get a better idea of Gemini costs, which is you can do with the others, but you'd have to go into billing and separate concerns, and it can get a bit tricky to do so. Next. So who is this for? This, to me, is the sort of true democratization of the data. If you put enough effort and time and concern into building out the middle layer, the detail, then you're going to get the most output out of it. And because you can take it to where people live and where people work and where people are asking the questions, the barrier to entry for anybody with any sort of person within a stakeholder group is extremely low. They can just ask the question and get the answer. They don't have to go to a specific place. Next question. Next slide. So what does it do? Well, lots more detail can go in there. You've got that agentic architecture, so you can separate out concerns and have sort of more powerful systems. You can embed it where people live and where people are already working. Things you need to consider, really, it's more complex. You need to understand things like MCPs, the agent development kit, cloud infrastructure, Python. So it's not necessarily all things that are typically in an analyst's wheelhouse. Currently it's in preview, or a lot of these things are in preview, so it's not necessarily ready for production or for regulated data, and it requires close monitoring of those models and the costs associated with it. You need to have a good eye on it and not let it run away from you. Next slide. I thought I'd hidden this slide. Let's go to the next slide. With everything we've talked about, there's kind of a pattern emerges. the more effort you put in, the more sort of complexity and in some cases cost you put into these things, the sort of more reliable and the wider reach it has within an organization. The lower hanging fruit, the natural language to SQL, for example, is great, but it's very much only applicable to analysts. Whereas the ADK and MCP toolboxes take a lot of effort to build and to layer in all of that additional information. But once you get there, you get a lot more out of it. They put Looker Enterprise in there as well because that is a high cost solution. So it's a lot more in depth in that way. We'd love to put the Looker Studio Pro higher up, like Larry mentioned, but right now it's so buggy. It just will have such low impact and will probably erode trust more than anything else. Next. All of that said, if the data is rubbish, the stuff that comes out of this is still going to be rubbish. You can put in metadata, semantics, relationship mapping to the cows come home, and you can be really proud of that central information layer that you've created. If the underlying data isn't good, then you're still going to get unreliable answers. So centralizing data in a robust, governed platform is going to be the first step you're going to need to take to really getting the most out of these sort of conversational platforms. Next. So, and where did dashboards still make sense? They still make sense in a lot of places. This isn't you go out and replace all of your tracking with conversational analytics. When you need consistent, repeatable reporting, something you can just glance at, dashboards all the way. And when multiple stakeholders need to just have one set of answers that they can rely on, dashboards. I don't think dashboards are going anywhere just yet. Maybe they're just going to evolve. So all of that said, there's a few ways you could maybe explore this stuff, and MeasureLab can help you do so. At the bottom, you'll see a data readiness assessment call to action. Call to action. You're supposed to say it's a call to action, are you? But a button there. But that takes you to a readiness assessment that kind of assesses all of the various aspects that we think you need to have in place to get the most out of these things, and it'll give you a kind of a free report of how you're currently looking and where you need to improve. Have a look at conversational analytics proof of concepts, identify where there's actual use cases within your business where this would make sense. Don't just go out and start poking at things because you'll probably get lost and not get the value out of it. And then soon we're going to be running a agent development kit workshop where we'll get people together and we'll kind of help and assist people in building out these agents that I discussed earlier. So keep an eye out for that and register any interest in joining us that. Any questions?
Thank you, Matthew and Lowry, for that. We do have some questions, so I'm going to get straight to them because we've only got a couple of minutes left on the allocated time. James Miller says, hello, friends. Do you have any more detail on the usage on tokens around the natural language to SQL? Any idea of average costs?
I can answer this. I didn't look into this. It was very much I wanted to explore how well it was. Blindly, I guess, in terms of the cost of Gemini, which wasn't great. But this is definitely something that's going to be the next thing I research, is our billing profile, basically.
Yeah, I would guess for natural language to SQL, it would be quite low because it's only performing very small, distinct little actions. So it will be pretty negligible little additions to maybe a Gemini cost within a platform, but nothing significant, I would say.
Okay, thank you. A quick one I can answer. So a couple of people have asked about if there'll be a link shared for the webinar and the slides afterwards. There will be. You'll get an on-demand link to watch the webinar again or to share it with colleagues. And we'll also send out the slides as well for people to look at. Somebody else asked, Madeline asked, if we're going to do a future talk on conversational analytics in GA4. I think as Matthew said on one of the previous slides, our next focus is going to be going a bit deeper on the agent development kit. So that's going to be our focus for the next webinar. Micah, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, has asked if you embed conversational analytics in your own custom apps in the way that Matthew explained, what is the risk that users unknowingly run expensive queries and how can you manage that? Good question.
Yeah, I think that's going to come down into that middle layer that we talked about. So with the API, with the conversational analytics, and with the ADK, you can specify the tables. So I think Larry kind of hinted at it, but pointing it at complete raw reporting tables is probably not a good idea. You want to create specific tables, reporting tables for your AI applications, layer them with the metadata and things like that. And you can also layer in a lot of instructions, restrict, say, certain agents to certain user groups, and put in additional prompting mechanisms and things to limit query sizes. With the ADK, for example, you can ask it to first do a dry run and return back an estimated cost before it goes and runs anything. So there's various mechanisms you can put in place to mitigate big expensive bills.
I know we're at time, so I appreciate some people are going to have to drop, but we're okay to keep answering the questions. So for anyone who does drop, you'll be able to get the answers to those questions in the on-demand video afterwards. Again, sorry if I pronounced this wrong. Thirumalai asks, how do you embed directly in Looker Studio? And I think that was asked at the time when you were talking through the Conversational Analytics API, Matthew. So I'm thinking that's what the question is around. If it isn't, maybe you could ask the question again in the chat if you're still here. But does that make sense, Matthew, as a question?
Yeah, I think Larry actually did the embedding of the Conversational Analytics Streamlit application. We essentially made a Streamlit application that talked to the API, and then I think you can just embed web pages in Looker Studio anyway. Larry, is that right?
Yeah, it's literally an option on the top bar. You can embed an iframe, I think it's called, and you point that to the URL that your Streamlit app is hosted on, and it should pull through.
Yeah, the complex bit is the Streamlit application, but there's so much information out there now and templates and things like that you can use as a starting point to create that application on top of the API. That it's fairly straightforward.
And one more from Lano. Is the conversational analytics in Looker Studio limited to some specific countries? Can't seem to find it in Sweden. Do we know of any country restrictions?
It's well, you say Looker Studio there. It's worth just pointing out it's Looker Studio Pro that it's in. If you do have Looker Studio Pro, I'm unsure on country specifics, but just make sure you have got Looker Studio Pro first, because it won't be available in just standard Looker Studio. I think Looker Studio Pro, don't quote me on this, is around 10-ish pounds a month. I forget exactly. I should have written that down.
I think it's $9.
$9. Yeah. But yeah, check you've got Looker Studio Pro first. If not, maybe there is some country restriction. But I would have thought Sweden would have been within the EU region stuff, but yeah.
Okay, just having a quick look to see if we've got any others. There's a question, how much does Looker Studio Pro cost? And can you share agents between license holders?
So we covered the cost.
Yeah, cost is around $9 a month per license, or per user, sorry. And then you can share agents between different users who've got that Looker Studio Pro.
Great.
Yeah, anybody who want to use it would have to have a license. So you can, not everyone at the organization will automatically have access.
Okay, thank you again, Larry and Matthew, and thank you everybody who joined us today. As I mentioned, you'll get a link afterwards to the on-demand video so you can rewatch this webinar or share it, and also a copy of the slides to look back over as well. But for now, thank you all, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at the next webinar.
Thanks.
Thank you.